All right, so I started the recording and I'm going live with the webinar now.
I will have to let the participants in.
Yeah, I see the count going up.
Gakumbe, just during the speeches, if you could turn your camera off and turn it back when the panel starts. Thank you very much.
The webinar is live. So I see that we have already 100 participants in. We can start.
Yeah. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, good afternoon if you're in our time zone to the Business Integrity Roundtable, where we will discuss the promoting business integrity in SMEs. You know that, let's say, the last years, companies have become extremely important actor when it comes to fighting corruption and raising integrity. But way too often when we speak about companies, people only have multinational enterprises in mind, not companies which build, let's say, the majority of the private sector in almost, no, not almost, in all countries. I know those are the small and medium enterprises. And this roundtable discussion is planning to discuss how the SMEs are ready to fight corruption risks and what can you do to assist them. We also seize this opportunity. The OECD will launch two important documents, which one of them should help SMEs to prevent corruption. So it will be OECD Toolkit for raising awareness and prevention of corruption in the SMEs. The second one is also an important OECD publication, is the OECD report on anti-corruption compliance in times of crisis, building resilience and seizing opportunities, which is a topic which is extremely important, having in mind, let's say, the post-COVID times. Hopefully, nothing similar as COVID will repeat, but we better be ready. Since both documents were financed by the government of Sweden, and I would like to thank Sweden in my own personal name, but also in the name of the OECD, for this financial contribution, we have given the opportunity to Mr. Johan Forsell. He's the Minister for International Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade of Sweden, who will address us all in his pre-recorded speech.
Welcome. It is an honor to open today's Business Integrity Roundtable on promoting business integrity in small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs. This is an important area of work since SMEs play a key role in the global economy. They create a large share of global GDP and drive job growth and innovation. Corruption is indeed a challenge for all types of companies, and SMEs are particularly vulnerable due to their limited resources for preventive measures. Many of these actors now recognize the importance of undertaking efforts to develop awareness-raising initiatives and integrity standards targeting SMEs. Yet supporting SMEs in putting in place adequate anti-corruption measures is easier said than done. The member countries of the Working Group on Bribery have been aware of such issues for many years. Sweden considers it particularly worthy of following up and developing a method to identify the challenges and possible solutions through the sharing of best practices. And to this end, the government of Sweden has been delighted to support the OECD in developing a toolkit that identifies a set of tried and tested initiatives to help SMEs combat corruption. This is but one component of a two-part project focusing on anti-corruption measures that are integral to sustainable business practices. The other component is a report focusing on managing anti-corruption in times of crisis. The fight against corruption is an uphill battle that cannot be won with complacency. Together, these reports are essential elements to navigate corporate compliance, It is my hope that their findings will help increase the engagement of public and private sector stakeholders in businesses of all sizes in corruption prevention. This could usher in a new era of more effective anti-corruption compliance programs and policies. I wish you fruitful discussions.
Well, that was the minister from Sweden, the country which financed the important documents, which you're just about to hear everything about them. And those two documents will be presented by Mr. Antonio Gomes, who's the Deputy Director of DAF, which stands for Director for Business and Finance in the OECD. Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Drago, distinguished speakers and dear colleagues. It is really my pleasure to welcome you all today on behalf of the OECD to this presentation of two publications forming parts of a project supported by the government of Sweden. I take the opportunity to thank Minister Johan Forssell for his keynote remarks and for Sweden's continued support to the work of the OECD. This project focuses on corporate anti-corruption measures and aims at supporting sustainable business practices. The first component of this project is the study on anti-corruption compliance in times of crisis, building resilience and seizing opportunities. The COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing economic crisis caused major disruption to many businesses globally. The OECD has been active in helping its members confront the challenges brought forth. Now, more than 2 years into the pandemic, this study assesses how the crisis has affected corruption risks faced by businesses, the impact of the crisis on companies' motivations for investing in anti-corruption compliance, and the impact in practice of the crisis on anti-corruption compliance operations and processes, to understand to what extent the crisis has created challenges, but also opportunities in anti-corruption compliance. The study aims to draw lessons from the twin crises to provide businesses with recommendations on how to anticipate and navigate corruption risks which can be brought about by future crises, and makes recommendations on how governments can best support businesses in this context. It follows the OECD study on drivers of compliance, which described the state of play in anti-corruption compliance just before the crisis onset in 2020, and received widespread attention from businesses and governments. In a few words, how has the crisis impacted anti-corruption compliance? First, new specific corruption risks arose at the onset of the crisis, related to, for example, emergency procurement procedures to acquire medical material, increased use of donations from businesses to governments, or increased interactions with public officials such as customs officials in the context of cross-border movement restrictions. The impact of these new risks was overall short-lived and very much business activity and sector specific. More structurally, general corruption risks increased as a result of the economic crisis and supply chain disruptions, which affected most businesses. Many companies struggled to continue their operations, and under pressure may have felt constrained to expose themselves to higher corruption risks and to deprioritize anti-corruption compliance measures. The economic crisis is not over, and the pressure to engage in misconduct remains high. This study calls on the private sector and on governments to work together and conduct a thorough assessment of the evolution of corruption risks over the past 2 years to inform their anti-corruption efforts. Second, fear of enforcement remains a decisive driver of anti-corruption compliance for businesses, but the protection of corporate reputation has become an even stronger motivation. Indeed, Certain companies were at the forefront of the response to the crisis and benefited from considerable public support. As a consequence, social scrutiny of corporate behavior has rarely been so intense. As accurately expressed by Transparency International UK, all eyes are on business right now. Increasing social expectations also contributed to the fast development of environmental, social, and governance objectives, ESG objectives, and standards, to which businesses are increasingly receptive. Governments can and should seize the momentum to engage further with companies in these areas. The study further highlights that governments could provide greater incentives for anti-corruption compliance and better support large companies as well as SMEs to meet the challenges arising from crisis. And surprisingly, the need for enhanced cooperation between the private sector and government authorities is greater than ever before. Third, as could be expected, the crisis generated a mix of challenges and also opportunities for corporate anti-corruption compliance. Whilst challenges should not be underestimated, they appear to have been short-lived and essentially linked to the need to adapt to new circumstances with reduced capacities. On a more positive note, opportunities quickly arose, with efficiency gains due to the accelerated reliance on new technologies, from the development of virtual tools for training to more sophisticated solutions such as automation, artificial intelligence, or machine learning. Businesses had to develop their capacity to be creative and agile, including in their anti-corruption work. The study notably includes a case study of a multinational company which, following the outbreak of the crisis, adapted the review of its ethics and compliance program and risk assessment methodology to new constraints. New challenges as well, and really made the best of available technological tools. Finally, the study looks ahead and proposes a way forward for businesses and governments. 14 recommendations highlight, for example, the importance of reassessing risks, the benefits of collective actions, or the needs for a more structural approach to crisis management, taking into account anti-corruption compliance. These recommendations also point to the specific challenge and needs of SMEs, which have been particularly affected by the crisis. They complement the other publication that we are launching today. And SMEs play a very important role in the economy. They create a large share of global gross domestic product, as well as many jobs. However, SMEs are particularly vulnerable to corruption. This combination of significant contribution to the global economy and heightened vulnerability to corruption has prompted governments, international organizations, and other stakeholders to pay more attention to the specific situation of SMEs. The OECD Working Group on Bribery, the 44 countries party to the Anti-Bribery Convention, has often highlighted in its publications the constant challenge for government authorities to reach out to SMEs, to encourage and support corruption prevention and compliance efforts, with the objective of assisting Working Group on Bribery member countries and other relevant stakeholders. We are therefore proud to launch today, with the support of the government of Sweden, as I mentioned before, a toolkit for raising awareness and preventing corruption in SMEs. It provides examples of successful initiatives which government authorities, international organizations, business and civil society organizations, professional associations, and large companies have adopted to assist SMEs in understanding their risk exposure and implementing adequate anti-corruption measures. Starting with the who. The toolkit identifies which actors may be best placed to implement these initiatives and points to collaboration as the key. Indeed, a collaborative and multi-stakeholder approach will result in a tailor-made, sector-specific and resource-efficient awareness-raising strategies. The costs of implementing anti-corruption measures are thus spread across multiple stakeholders, avoiding overburdening SMEs themselves. In general terms, government authorities bear the responsibility of initiating anti-corruption awareness-raising initiatives for the private sector. But when the focus of these initiatives is SMEs, government engagement with other relevant stakeholders is undoubtedly the most efficient approach. International organizations can offer evidence-based policymaking inputs to all relevant stakeholders, as well as directly to SMEs. IOs are really well positioned to promote their own awareness-raising standards and initiatives, such as the OECD Good Practice Guidance on Internal Controls, Ethics, and Compliance. Moreover, IOs offer a fora for countries and stakeholders from the private sector and civil society to share their experience on challenges, but also on successes. The support of business organizations such as BIAC and the ICC in developing the studies presented to you today is also a testament to their leadership role in the business community. Business organizations' knowledge of the challenges and constraints of SMEs, including in specific industries, is invaluable when planning awareness raising and prevention of corruption initiatives. Naturally, large companies have an important role to play, as encouragement from the supply chain may be of a particular motivator, strong motivator in the case of SMEs that want to maintain business relationships with larger companies. Professional associations can also be instrumental in encouraging anti-corruption compliance. Certain professions, such as auditors and lawyers, are well placed to assist SMEs in developing anti-corruption measures to prevent and detect anti-corruption. Finally, civil society organizations can offer a not-for-profit, non-state, non-partisan perspective to help SMEs comprehend the benefits of adopting anti-corruption compliance programs and to support SMEs wishing to report corruption allegations. The toolkit further points to collective action and public-private partnerships as fundamental awareness-raising tools. Moving from the who to the how, the toolkit identifies preliminary steps that government authorities and other private and civil society stakeholders can take to initiate anti-corruption compliance, such as information campaigns to highlight the positive impact of anti-corruption compliance on business results. Simpler and smarter anti-corruption compliance guidance or requirements for SMEs can help create a positive environment that will facilitate SMEs engagement. The toolkit further highlights the steps for creating an effective awareness-raising strategy, including mapping the corruption risks for targeted businesses, promoting public consultations, taking into consideration the variety of SMEs, and continuously reviewing the strategy and initiatives. Having set the scene on the who and the how, the OECD Toolkit proposes a list of 10 practical tools with practical case examples. The goal is to present a compilation of tried and tested initiatives that have proven effective in specific countries and industries. And these initiatives include developing clear and easily accessible anti-corruption compliance online tools, disseminating anti-corruption guidance for new exporters and investors, facilitating compliance e-learning for SME representatives, providing support to carry out third-party due diligence, incentivizing anti-corruption compliance, providing targeted government support for SME operating abroad, facilitating access to information on concluded enforcement actions, encouraging large companies to provide anti-corruption compliance mentorship to SMEs, supporting and promoting whistleblower reporting channels, including for SMEs, and finally, supporting SMEs in times of crisis to ensure resilience to corruption. And you can see the slide that has been put on screen, which actually summarizes what I've just described and that you will be able to find in the toolkit. So I look forward to hearing our panelists' views on this topic and further insights into how we can together help promote business integrity in SMEs. Please note that both publications are now available on the OECD website. You will see the links in the chat. Corruption is a moving target, and we all have a very important role to play in the fight against it. And of course, the OECD stands ready to continue its role as a key player in this global dialogue. And before I give back the floor to you, Drago, I really wanted to thank you for your 9 years of remarkable service as chair of the OECD Working Group on bribery, and really wanted to wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Antonio. It was a real pleasure and an honor to serve the OECD and the countries and the good guys there. So, but as you know, our cooperation does not discontinue. We will continue, and I'm looking forward for new challenges. And thank you also for presenting 2 publications, knowing the needs of the countries, but also the companies. I'm sure that they will be massively used because they bring really some important, let's say, elements which will assist on one hand the SMEs, but also on the other hand also the governments to improve the fight against corruption, first in the SMEs, and then having in mind the second publication also in the times of crisis. So this was the introduction. I would like to thank once again to Mr. Forsell, the Minister for International Development, Cooperation and Foreign Trade of Sweden, and of course, Mr. Antonio Gomes, Deputy Director of the OECD TAF. And now we will start with the webinar, which will be, let's say, organized in the following format. We will have 50 minutes of discussions with 4 speakers, and then 15 minutes of Q&A. You can already start entering questions into the chat. They will be reviewed and they'll be answered at the end. As I said, we have 4 speakers today and have a pleasure to, let's say, present them now at the beginning so you will know who is who. Ms. Trisha Van Orden is the Acting Director of the Trade Promotion Coordinating Committee Secretariat in the US Department of Commerce. Trisha also serves as the US delegate to APEC Small and Medium Enterprises Working Group, and in this role, she oversees the business ethics for APEC's SMEs initiative, a multi-stakeholder collective action initiative to strengthen ethical business and create a level playing field for companies of all sizes in the health sector. Welcome, Trisha. Next lady, Ms. Ekaterina Lisova, is a Senior Program Officer for Eurasia at CIPE, which is Center for International Private Enterprises from Washington, D.C. Ekaterina has over 15 years of experience working on issues of media freedom, civil society development, and anti-corruption in the former Soviet Union. Prior to joining CIPE, Ekaterina specialized on corporate integrity compliance and fraud and corruption investigations while working as a lawyer for Trace International and the World Bank's Integrity Vice Presidency. So welcome to you, Ekaterina, too. The first gentleman, Dr. Kanyene Gakombe, is the current chairman of Kenya Healthcare Federation and CEO of Metropolitan Hospital. He is also a director of MedSource Group Ltd, a founding member and past vice chair of the KHF, the first healthcare governor in KEPSA, a past member of the National Economic and Social Council, and chairman of Kenya Association of Hospitals. Mr. Gakombe, we are very happy to have you today with us. Ms. Vibeke Elisant Lerbak is a Norwegian entrepreneur, but not living and working in Norway, but in Thailand since 1989. She's the founder of Felicia Thailand, an SME in the high-end jewelry sector. Vibeke has joined private sector collective actions against corruption, and she's a certified under Coalition Against Corruption. Her company is a member of the UN Global Compact and incorporates their 10 principles into her business strategy, policies, and procedures. Vibeke has been active on the Thai Norwegian Chamber of Commerce board since 1997. So Vibeke, we are also very happy to have you with us today. Before diving into specifics, I would ask all of you, what do you think? How well aware and prepared SMEs are to anti-corruption risks? And let's start with Trisha, followed by Ekaterina, Gakombe, and Vibeke. So Trisha, what would you say?
Happy to kick us off. Thank you so much. And I just want to say I'm absolutely thrilled to join this esteemed panel. So thank you so much for having me join. The answer is it depends. I think in general, small businesses are not aware of the risks to corruption and the multitude of resources that are available to them. But I think over the years, a number of industry-led collective action efforts are slowly changing that. So in industries that are showing a leadership role in addressing corruption risks, and where small businesses can access resources directly through their peers or through industry leaders, I think there is a case to be made that there is awareness of these risks. So I look forward to discussing some of these collective action efforts in further detail to highlight areas where small businesses are becoming more aware and accessing tools to try to turn the tide.
Thank you, Trisha. Ekaterina, what would you say?
Thank you, Drago, and it's great to be here. And I would like to congratulate our OECD partners, colleagues for doing such a tremendous initiative and publishing a toolkit to support the SME business integrity efforts. So in response to those questions, I'll just say that from SEP's perspective, and we have over 200 projects in about 80 countries around the world, and 1/4 of those projects are on business integrity, supporting SMEs. We see that SMEs may not be aware about compliance and integrity. And by the way, these terms are sometimes hard to translate into foreign languages. So we have to use the word honesty and transparency and ethics and things like that. However, SMEs are very well aware of injustice, and injustice in selective law enforcement, when they see where there is a political influence in certain business decisions, when the procurement contracts being awarded not to the most competent and professional SME, but those that are in a political network of a politically connected person. So the same thing goes to the inspections, right, which is a big deal for SMEs. And when one specific SMEs are targeted for inspections and others just avoided by inspectors. So all of these issues of injustice are there. And of course, this injustice are intrinsically linked to corruption issues. So they are aware, but in this very, very kind of real life, everyday experiences. And in terms of preparedness, when we talk about anti-corruption compliance or business integrity for SMEs, we are expecting that SMEs will change the way they operate. If we're talking just beyond developing the program, developing the paper product. So, and that comes with a risk. And we see many courageous and forward-looking entrepreneurs and small businesses that are willing to take that risk, that are using the ethical guidance as their basis to make decisions in very challenging situations. So that's all these people that need the support, and I'm sure will benefit from the toolkit that the OECD presented today. Thank you.
Thank you. Gakombe, I'm sure you have extensive experience in dealing with SMEs, not only in Kenya, but also wider. So what would you say, how ready are they to cope with corruption?
Thank you for having me. And from my corner of the world, which is Kenya and the wider East African region, SMEs are quite aware of corruption and the negative effect it has in their doing business in terms of making it more difficult, awarding tenders to the wrong people, and basically reducing their profits and their ability to operate. The big challenge we face is that for many, they accept it as a way of life, that it's something they have to live with, it's something they have to negotiate their way through. But increasingly, there are groups such as the one I belong to that have been engaged over a period of time in trying to improve the business environment. And one of the key planks in improving the business environment is reducing the impact of corruption in our day-to-day operations. And the federation I belong to, as we go into details later, basically focuses on this as one of the key pillars in improving the business environment in Kenya, the region, and Africa at a broader level.
Thank you. Rebecca, how do you see the SMEs? You know, you can observe them in two completely different parts of the world. So I'm sure you can share some interesting findings with us.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me today. I think this is a very important event. The launch of the Toolkit is something that we've been waiting for a long time. So as an SME, I think you can divide it in two. Size is important. When you're an entrepreneur and when you're small, I don't think the awareness is that big. But as you grow as a company, I think you get more aware of the requirements. Another area is location. Corruption and how to do business is looked at in different ways in different parts of the world. And it's very often related to education. In principle, I think most SMEs have some awareness today. We are more informed than we used to be because of a new digital world. But it is a journey. It is a road that you need to go on. So very often, I think as an SME, first you need to understand what is compliance and what is part of doing business. And in particularly in this part of the world, what is compliance and what is part of doing business. I think often an SME will unwillingly walk into a non-compliant area because of lack of knowledge and lack of understanding of it. And I think also very often is how do you start to comply and can you afford to comply? I think a mindset very often in an SME is that it's too expensive and you just need to deal, accept that there's some corruption. Navigation is very difficult. I agree with Ekaterina that very often the words that we use are too complicated. Transparency, trust, honesty, it's words that everybody can understand. But when you talk about compliance and you're trying to navigate yourself through some of the documents that teach you about it, it's very, very often very difficult. So I think I really welcome the toolkit and I look forward to the session today and also to be able to read and go through the details of the toolkit.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, you mentioned some points which are really important. You see, due to the points which you mentioned, let's say there are no resources for developing compliance mechanisms and so on. There are people who ask, well, why should the SMEs develop the anti-corruption compliance practices at all? What we heard from all four of you is that there is a huge diversity of, let's say, of the levels of awareness among the SMEs around the world on the risks of corruption, and also huge differences when it comes to how well equipped they are to fight corruption. As a general principles, I'm sure we can, without any big risk, we can say they are less prepared to cope with corruption risks than the large businesses. But let's wait, let's see. Maybe we'll be surprised. So the first question to you, Vibeke, you're from Norway and you run an SME in a foreign country, Thailand. What were the main challenges and motivating factors in introducing compliance measures to prevent corruption in your day-to-day business activities? It must have been quite a challenging task.
Well, I think first of all, I've been in Thailand for 33 years. So I'm raised in Norway. I've gone to school in Norway. but my business experience and my business life is in Thailand. Felicia, which is a jewelry manufacturing company. We manufacture jewelry for as OEM services for the world, or globally, mainly towards the European market. I have 150 workers working for me, and as a company, we are under RJC, Responsible Jewelry Council, Coalition Against Corruption, and we also comply with the UN Global Compact 10 principles. So what are my main challenges? Well, I think the main challenges is the mindset. What is corruption, and what does it matter to, or what part is it in part of doing business? And this mindset can be different from where you operate. They can be different from which industry you're in. So I think you need to identify those areas first. I'm raised in Norway. I'm raised from an early age that through family and through school, where we know that corruption is not accepted. I live in Thailand. I do business in Thailand, and here it's not part of the educational curriculum yet. I hope it will be implemented. But doing business in Thailand does have some gray areas. I would say in Norway, it's black and white. Black should not exist. It should be white. And in Thailand, there's still some gray area. What I try to do in my company, I try to implement the Scandinavian way. I try to implement or set a moral compass. So a moral compass means high integrity, honesty, respect, sincerity, trust. I think all those areas are very important in business. We try to train within the company. We try to educate the staff on what is right and what is wrong. And I think it's important also not do only the talk, but also do the walk. So we actually practice what we say. As example, zero tolerance. Is that something we should comply to and within our company, or do we accept sometimes that you have to pay some tea money? In our company, no. It's not acceptable. Zero tolerance is something that we practice. Very often they will say, okay, well, if you do not pay, will you lose the opportunity? Personally, I don't think you lose the opportunity. I think you need to be consistent. And by being consistent, you actually gain opportunities, because your customers will realize that you're transparent. Your suppliers will realize that you're transparent, as will every entity that you're working with. And I think the most important part for an SME is the cost of implementing a policy or cost of complying. Very often you think that it's too expensive. You can't really join any organization because it's too expensive. Again, on the contrary, I think the opposite. I think you invest in showing that you are in compliance, and by that you open the doors for opportunities. So by us joining, for example, Coalition Against Corruption, by us joining Responsible Jewelry Council, I don't need to do any marketing work. That's my marketing tool, because people will find us on the webpage. They're looking for these areas to be important of doing business. It's very important under the SDG goals. So I think for us, it's shown to be a sales tool. We market our company as a company that is transparent, and we also act that way. So I think embrace the ethical and sustainable practices has proved to be beneficial to my company.
Well, thank you so much. You see, it seems that you're one of the rare exceptions, from the general rule, which I sadly observed in past years, namely that when individuals and companies arriving from, let's say, countries with high level of corporate integrity are entering the markets in the countries which are not so successful in fighting corruption, instead of, let's say, introducing the principles that they have learned back home, they're adjusting to the principles of doing business in the country where they're arriving to. So I see that you're an exception, and I'm really happy to hear that from you. Ekaterina, to you now. What do you think? What are the drivers that can push SMEs to assess their corruption risks and to develop anti-corruption compliance practices? How can business organizations contribute to the promotion of business integrity in the SMEs?
Thank you, Draga. Well, what we do at SIPE, we had the same question, right? What are the drivers that can really support SMEs to make the ethical choice and develop those anti-corruption compliance programs? And we asked the SMEs themselves, what can help you? What would make you to turn to developing these programs? And we published the results of this. We call them small, case studies, those interviews with small business owners in different countries of the world, in Africa, in Europe, and Eurasia. And what we hear is that people would say that we really would like to have an option for ethical choice, something that actually Kanina just spoke about before. I mentioned that they feel that this option is not always available, and only a small number of SMEs owners that would still go and engage in corrupt behavior for whatever reasons. But if given option, the people usually will do an honest and ethical decision. And I would like to mention here that corruption is a criminal offense in all jurisdictions where we work, and it is a political issue. So when the SMEs are engaging in anti-corruption work, they are taking on risks, as I mentioned before, professional and personal risks. And they also believe that they put themselves at disadvantage, something that Viveka just mentioned, that they put themselves at competitive disadvantage, that they attract unnecessary attention from politicians and criminal groups and so on, because they're supposed to report on what they see on those corrupt behavior where public officials are involved, other businesses, large businesses, monopolistic businesses are involved, which present a very serious political force, of course. So we are asking SMEs to go against status quo in countries with systemic corruption, where SIPE actually works. But we have to understand that. And in terms of drivers, that status quo should be changed. It should be turned around when anti-corruption should become an advantage and not a disadvantage, right? And so what we're looking at those components of that system that would allow transparency and ethics to be a benefit and an advantage that would be recognized, that this SMEs will be recognized for this behavior and promoted for this behavior. So we look at key societal players, and the drivers would come from their behavior, from example, from the state. Yeah, the state should recognize the role for SMEs that present from 60 to 90% of all registered businesses in certain markets, which is a huge force. So the tone from the top should be from state saying directly that SMEs are part of anti-corruption, that they're not part of the problem, they're part of the solution. They also should provide incentives for this type of behavior. And SMEs are consistently asking us at SIPE of what type of incentive, how the state can support them. And there are certain issues that I think Toolkit also might be going into those solutions. So building trust between the state and the business and SMEs is extremely important. The second category, of course, the civil society, the customers that would value the ethical posture of SMEs and would prefer the services and products produced and offered by those SMEs that are transparent, that are ethical, that are honest. Of course, international partners have a huge role to play in terms of these drivers. And we increasingly see that. I think many of you already mentioned that of the panelists here, of the role of the supply chain partners driving ESG and anti-corruption compliance behavior. Credit institutions, banking organizations, so anything who offer credits. SMEs are in huge need for credits right now for development, for overcoming COVID consequences and so on. And they usually, they don't have collateral, they cannot get credits from the banks. And certain banks are now putting certain, they are putting certain incentives and allow companies that can prove that they have established compliance programs get those credits with a certain lower interest rate. So all this type of behavior drivers would help those companies that would like to make ethical choice to do it.
Well, thank you. You mentioned the words help, assistance many times, which might point in the direction that the SMEs might need help in identifying risks and overcoming challenges to implement adequate anti-corruption measures. But who is the best place to provide such help? Viveke, did you get any support from internal stakeholders such as government, agencies, business organizations when you are developing and implementing your anti-corruption compliance policies and practices? If so, which ones and how? And do you wish you had greater support? And if so, from whom?
Well, if I go back in time, so it's quite a few years since I arrived in Thailand. When I started Felicia in 1995, there was very little help to get. I think mainly because I didn't know where to get it. I was an entrepreneur. I started in a new country. But I basically learned by doing, and I tried my best to implement Scandinavian ethical practices. And from day one, I've always practiced zero tolerance. In 2010, I shifted my business from doing our own collections and selling at the jewelry shows to wholesalers. I shifted to doing OEM services. And that also meant that I had to comply to a lot of regulations. So my customers, they would come with long contracts of how I would have to comply. And believe me, in the beginning, I did not even know how to read those documents. Far from it could I comply to them. So one of my friends, she said it in a good way. She said, I'd rather have a root canal than to try to read these documents. And that's a fact. I mean, it's very, very difficult for an SME to understand the language in legal contracts. So instead of getting a root canal, since I'm very scared of the dentist, I decided to implement certain things. So I started with hiring skilled personnel that were strong where I was weak. I engaged a legal partner that I trusted, and we started the process of joining Coalition Against Corruption, CAC. And in CAC, they have what they call SME clinics, which are amazing because they'll train my staff in Thai, and they'll give them guidance to how to comply, and also make them understand, like, why is there a non-gift policy? Because in Thailand, it's normal to give gifts. So why should you comply to a non-gift policy? So this is something that I really have to thank CAC for. The other thing that CAC did was that they allowed my auditor to qualify as the one who should audit my company before we were approved or certified. And that made also my auditor understand better what we were doing. So all of that has been good actions. Now, the biggest or most complicated one I had was Responsible Jewelry Council, because that was very difficult to comply to. So I had to engage professionals, and with it, we had to implement policies. We had to implement more control routines, internal controlling, proper accounting routines we already had, but still with the proper accounting procedures, we also had to look at doing a third-party audit. So there's a lot of things that I never thought about as an SME, but because of Responsible Jewelry Council, I was forced to implement them. In the beginning, Responsible Jewelry Council had very little guidance, but right now they refer to OECD and they say you have to comply with OECD regulations. So I'm glad that we now have Toolkit, because first time when I went into the 2020 or 2021, the big bribery policy, it is quite difficult to navigate through. So the toolkit will be very useful, even for my company, though I can afford external services. It's good for me to have the toolkit and an easy way to read things. Complying is not a one-day job. You know, complying is a journey for an SME. So I think it's very important that we realize that it's a journey and we allow that journey. I have been a member of, I would say the other area where I've really gotten help is through the chambers. I've been a member of the Thai Norwegian Chamber of Commerce since 1996. And we have an MOU with the CAC, Coalition Against Corruption. I have also been I'm also presently the chairwoman of the Joint Foreign Chamber of Commerce, which represents 34 chambers. And we have an MOU with the National Anti-Corruption Commission. We have an MOU with the ACT. We have an MOU with CAC. We have training sessions. So all of this is extremely helpful for us as an SME. To fight corruption, you cannot do, so to fight corruption, at the end of it, I mean, to fight corruption, we can't do it alone. We need help, and this can be done through the organizations that I refer to.
Well, thank you. See, when you're talking about how you were walking the walk, everything seems so simple and logical, but I'm sure that a lot of energy and challenges have been involved. And I really enjoyed listening to you because obviously you have practical experience. You mentioned several institutions who can really offer some effective assistance. And from your response and from response of previous speakers, I can also realize, let's say, basically what I was telling to my countries in the working group on bribery is that it is not only one stakeholder that has a responsibility for promoting compliance, although clearly there is the government who has the most important role to do so. What the OECD toolkit shows is that multi-stakeholder collaboration is key, and this is what you mentioned too, Vibeke, for raising awareness and preventing corruption in SMEs. In this respect, the toolkit emphasizes the importance of incentivizing collective action initiative for this purpose, something what we have said in our new 2021 recommendation. But let's move on to Trisha. Based on your experience in the US Department of Commerce and as overseer of the Business Ethics for APEC SMEs initiative, how can governments and international organizations promote business integrity in SMEs?
Thank you. I'm really enjoying the perspectives that are shared today. So I'll highlight some of those. So as you just said, the collective action multi-stakeholder approach is really effective. And so I think what governments can do is find the partners to help amplify the messaging about the importance of business ethics to SMEs, and discussions about language and resonating with small businesses, I think, is important. And so rather than talking about the risk to SMEs and mitigation, I think it's important to frame this issue as competitiveness and resiliency, and talking about the benefits to business. And, both Vibeke and Ekaterina mentioned this. Every small business owner wants to be successful and wants to grow their business. And so when you think of business ethics as a tool to be more competitive, to access global value chains, to be qualified to participate in government procurements on a level playing field, I think that really excites small business owners, and they want to learn more. And they want to, they want to build the best possible business that can be around forever and grow. And so we've found that approach, working together with industry partners and other stakeholders, that approach really resonates with small businesses, and they want to learn more. I think taking a values-based approach is also really important. If a company doesn't have the resources to create a compliance program, that shouldn't stop a leader, and we've just heard evidence of this, this shouldn't stop the leader to have that tone at the top to establish the culture and the expectations among their employees. And so at a very first step, just understanding how individuals can affect the culture and decision-making, this can really create a strong governance structure. And we see evidence through the pandemic that companies that had strong governance structures and compliance programs were more successful coming through the pandemic. So we know, and we can share that story, that that this is good for your business and it can help your resiliency. So I think governments working together with partners, that's the best thing to do, is to say, if you want to grow your business and you want to have a successful business, like these are steps that you can take. You know, and another role that governments can play working with partners is in best practices setting. We've already heard that there are different perspectives of what's acceptable business conduct across markets. I think as more and more small businesses become globalized and internationalized, there needs to be a convergence of what acceptable business standards are. And governments can work together to convene stakeholders to set the best practices through codes of ethics, codes of conduct, and other industry-led best practices. It doesn't mean that governments need to mandate business conduct, but rather they can create a setting where industry comes together to create a shared acceptance of high standard business conduct. And that's really when industry is voluntarily abiding by those high standards, because they know it's good for business and they know it's going to lead to their business growth. That really leads to good outcomes. So setting standards. Once you set standards, capacity building is important, getting companies to a point where they can meet those standards and ideally raise the standards over time. So the best practices setting, capacity building, and then importantly, monitoring and evaluation to make sure that that these efforts are being impactful over time. Monitoring and evaluation also helps adjust the path forward, you know, based on what is successful and what is not successful. So that's kind of the three pillars of the work that the US government undertakes in collaboration with APEC and industry stakeholders to raise the bar for standards and hopefully improve governance approaches for small businesses. Our APEC Business Ethics Initiative has been around for 12 years. And I think it's had that longevity because it's been successful, because we've seen changes, and because we invest in the monitoring and evaluation to make sure it's successful. So I would say from an evidence-based policymaking perspective, the data gathering and analysis is really important to ensure that our efforts are paying off over the long run. So thank you.
Thank you. So you said three most important steps: standard setting, training, education, and M&E, monitoring and evaluation. Gakombe, you are the founder of a health-related SME and the chairman of the Kenya Healthcare Federation, KHF, which recently launched the Kenyan Consensus Framework for Ethical Collaboration. In your experience, what are the challenges and benefits of engaging in collective action to promote integrity in SMEs?
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is that the engaging in corruption is in many ways a rational choice. One is trying to grow their top line or trying to improve the bottom line. And corruption is basically trying to do either by taking unfair advantage of the systems that you are in. For example, growing the bottom line by not paying taxes or by not complying with rules. So the challenge we have in Kenya and around the region is to make the ethical choice the better choice as a way of growing both top line and bottom line, and therefore to increase the risks associated with doing with things that are unethical. And that's what we've been doing as a federation and as an alliance, because the way the Kenya private sector is organized is that we have organizations like mine, like the hospital. They are organized into an association. Then the associations, which are industry associations, organize into a federation. And at the very top, we have an alliance, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, that basically engages with the top echelons of government. So the benefits that we've seen, and the reason more and more organizations are joining federations and associations such as ours. One is resource mobilization. It's difficult to raise the resources alone to do the kind of things that are possible when you have a large organization that can attract resources from both members and other interested parties who are aligned with the objectives of the federation. So resource mobilization, be they financial resources, human resources, a lot of times social capital to engage with the leadership so as to get the necessary changes put in place. Political mobilization. The political class generally understands those who can stand in their way and make it difficult for them to achieve their political objectives. So by bringing the private sector together, we basically act as a counterweight in trying to get the right changes in place. There is learning. We are learning from each other. There is benchmarking between various organizations and across the value chain. There is capacity sharing because many times the problems that one subsector is facing or one organization is facing has already been solved by somebody else in the industry. And in certain emergencies, we are able to solve problems that may be facing a particular organization. For example, during COVID, one of our members who runs a digital pharmacy had their staff arrested trying to deliver drugs at night to patients who needed them. And it took the association to basically get the government to support them and stop harassing them because they were doing work that should have been allowed. They should have been among those who are not under curfew. The challenges are many, and one of them is what I call tokenism. Under our constitution, which was passed in 2010, anything that has not gone through public engagement generally gets thrown out by the courts as unconstitutional. And so there's a tendency for the government to invite private sector players as part of stakeholder engagement. But it's a token invitation. They simply want to count you in the quorum. So we have to make sure that we are not just being used to pass things that should not be. Then there are diverse interests. Some people thrive through corrupt transactions. Others thrive by doing the right things. So trying to bring these diverse interests together is a challenge because of the different owner mentalities and owner values. You are also trying to bring together local and international organizations with the dynamics involved. In healthcare, there are non-profits and for-profits trying to bring payers and providers into the same space. So we have to encourage what we call enlightened self-interest, where the private sector players look at improving the playing field so that everybody can compete in a better environment. And that has been our mantra to our members of the alliance, that there is no point competing in a minefield. It is better to improve the field, and then you can compete knowing that you're not likely to be blown up because you're operating in a very, very hostile environment. Then there's public perception that we are doing it merely to make money. There's quite a bit of skepticism that you can't make it without paying a bribe. There is a common saying in Kenya that you cannot become a shilling billionaire without having bribed someone. So we try and look for organizations that have made it without having to engage in corruption and hold them up as examples of an alternative way. And of course, capacity is limited. There are a lot of places to engage. The resources are inadequate. Our bankers and insurers are very organized. The rest of us are trying to organize better. Yes.
Well, let's say I like particularly a comparison with the minefield, and if you don't mind, I will use it, let's say, quite often from now on, because this is really showing what happens if the SMEs, or let's say companies in general, are not interested in fighting corruption. Ekaterina, how has the SIPE been engaging with SMEs around the globe to promote business integrity standards in SMEs?
Thank you, Draga. Well, I'm proud to mention that what Vibeke was talking about, CIC in Thailand, collective action against corruption. This is something where my colleagues at SIPE actually stood at the roots of over a decade ago, developing this, supporting this collective action initiative. So, and now we're so proud to see that it has almost 1,500 members and almost 500 of them are certified with external specially trained auditors who might certify the corruption compliance among those companies. So, and it remains actually one of those brightest examples of private sector anti-corruption collective actions in the world. So this is one of the type that SIPE does, and we do it in many other parts of the world. And I just want to mention also that over 15 years ago, SIPE, together with World Bank Institute, back then it existed, and Siemens and some other organizations, developed a very practical toolkit. It's called Fighting Corruption Together in the Collective Action. And it's just a really practical thing of addressing corruption using private sector means. Just to remind everyone that it's not even the SMEs fighting corruption and fighting it together. It's not the topic that appeared yesterday, but it's been some time where the need has developed a while ago. So SMEs do need support. Right, so Drago, as you mentioned, from all our responses of all panelists, they do need support, and they need support with foremost articulating how harmful corruption is, what loss it brings, and what waste it brings, not only to business community, but also to the society, and organizing the issue of corruption as the societal issue, and for example, framing it as something that everyone cares about. For example, what society you would like your children to live, right? Or what impact it has on environment, or other issues where society and SMEs have common issue, and corruption is on the way for that. So articulating corruption and articulating solution to corruption is the first thing that we're trying to assist our partners, as I said, in over 80 countries in the world. And as Vicky said, compliance professional language might be complicated. So interpreting those contractual clauses, audit clauses, anti-corruption, anti-bribery clauses is extremely important, because sometimes SMEs are signing those contracts with those clauses without really understanding what that means, what they need to change, what is expected from them. Another support that SIPE provides is, of course, bringing those SMEs together. And it's so incredible to see when those SME organize themselves in business integrity initiatives and business integrity clubs, such as in Armenia, or ethics and compliance club in Moldova, or in business integrity initiative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, or we're looking at Ethics First, which is SIPE-supported initiative which unites almost 13 countries in Africa, where SMEs can join the platform and support, and it gets support with developing those compliance programs. You see what then SMEs for the first time come to those forums, the first time they talk about corruption openly, because they see it's not just them. It's something that it's a common evil we need to fight with, and develop those solutions collectively and together, and strength in numbers, especially when it comes to SMEs. So that's another, bring them together, supporting those organizations such as CAC in Thailand and other initiatives that I just mentioned. Also advocacy. That's when the SMEs are feeling that they do have voice, because that's not usually the case. They think they below the radar. They're just in the survival mode, especially after COVID, and realization that they are a power. They have the voice, and they can participate in building the business environment that they would like to be in, transparent and ethical and honest. So we support them with advocacy, because it's not easy. It's not always straightforward, navigating those ways of engaging with the public sector. So that's something they need support, and we do support them with. And one very practical thing, when SMEs would like to engage with international partners, supply chain partners, those that are headquarters in the US or EU member states, So they do sometimes receive those due diligence questionnaires. They have no idea how to answer those. The questions, they're foreign to them, and we do support them on how to answer those questions, and not just, to make sure that the paper is in order, but what changes in the behavior are expected as a result of those questionnaires. So, and another thing that we do, which is kind of bread and butter of SIPE, we're working with business associations. Business associations are those that allow those SME to connect on certain common issues. And business associations are sometimes struggle to maintain, to sustain themselves. And working on business integrity and supporting their member organization, member companies with anti-corruption is actually a very valuable service that they can offer their members and improve their membership. So it's a win-win situation for both business associations and their member companies. And what we do, we work with other partners on the ground and really on a partnership base. We train through training of trainers, those business associations, and they stay on the ground as a resource for their members and other non-member companies to share all this information on anti-corruption compliance and business integrity. So yeah, so they can conduct their trainings themselves. They have necessary materials. They know how to reach for support if they need to, because we have a number of experts on anti-corruption compliance, technical experts who can support SMEs and business associations on these issues. Yeah, so that's for me.
Thank you. So when developing the toolkit, the OECD heard from many specialists that industry-specific awareness-raising initiatives targeting SMEs would be the best approach. Now I have questions for Gakombe and Trisha, but I would like to ask you, before asking you the question, we are running a little bit behind the schedule. Can you be as short and concise as possible? So Gakombe, the first question to you. Do sector-specific business federations have a particular role to play in promoting integrity standards and supporting SMEs? If so, why and how?
Yes, they do. And the first thing is standard setting, common standards, especially common standards and codes, and certain initiatives like what we have known as Blue Company, where you have criteria for membership who can join if they subscribe to certain standards. The second is risk. Members don't want the risk of being thrown out of a business association because they are doing the wrong thing, so they stay. The third is they help with group negotiations. Because the members can't afford certain services, we are able to negotiate on behalf, for example, with state organizations, whether it's about their payments or about the insurance contracts, or with the tax authorities to get tax reforms. Then there are legal negotiations and governance reforms. So essentially, on all the areas the toolkit covered, the business federations are able to engage. And in fact, when I went through the toolkit, for me, it's a validation of the things we are trying to do because it covers all the bases. It's a matter of plugging in and engaging at a deeper level.
Thank you. Trisha, you have also experience working in the healthcare sector. Following the success of the APEX SMEs initiative with health-related SMEs in the APEC region, what would be your advice to other government authorities or international organizations wanting to promote public-private partnerships and collective action initiatives to promote business integrity in SMEs?
Thank you. First, I just want to highlight everything Gakombe just said. Working with industry associations is so important to reach small businesses, and that's really been the key to success for the APEC Business Ethics for SMEs initiative. Working through associations in the health sector, we've reached 20,000 SMEs, and that wouldn't be possible if you're going business to business. And so those that extra reach through the associations has been really important, which is why convening power is one of the most important things governments can do. Governments have the ability to convene stakeholders, whether that's from industry or other stakeholders in the health sector. That might be patient organizations or healthcare providers who are real accountability agents for this work. So bringing together a multi-stakeholder coalition is a really important thing that governments can do. And I've heard that over and over, bringing people together, establishing trust, and creating accountability. So, and that's really at the heart of the multi-stakeholder collective action approach. Gakopy also mentioned that, tax reform or regulatory activity, procurement, those are all areas that governments can offer incentives. When small businesses, oftentimes by certifying an industry association developed code of conduct, when small businesses can demonstrate that that they have compliance programs and they're acting ethically, governments can create incentives by maybe fast tracking or providing additional consideration in regular government processes, such as in procurement or regulatory processes. So that's an area that governments can explore. I would also say enforcement recognition and incentives. Enforcement agencies can establish a framework where they recognize demonstrated compliance programs. So that's another way that governments can act. Governments can provide business ethics training. We've discussed this a lot. Governments have a lot of reach. They could, again, work through industry associations and other multiplier organizations and other even nonprofits or international organizations to provide capacity building and training. And another way that governments can directly promote ethics is through international engagement in trade agreements. And we've seen a use of anti-corruption chapters in trade agreements and other trade frameworks. So that's another way to, again, level the playing field to set standards and establish acceptable standards for business practices. So those are 6 areas where governments can play a direct role in promoting ethical business practices.
Well, thank you so much. So we see the situation is the following. Now I see we have we got 3 questions, and well, the chat says now we have opened 2, answered 3. I guess I will need some help here, but before getting there, because we still have 14 minutes. Now, let's say we all realized that in the last years the world has been shaken by different crises that affected the way businesses are conducted around the world. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis that followed had a particular significant impact in the business integrity agenda. So my question goes now to all of you, and of course you don't have to respond, all of you, but let's see who would like to say anything. To what extent have the pandemic and economic crisis impacted the development and implementation of initiatives aimed at promoting business integrity in SMEs? I'm sure you all felt it. It's just a question of who will tell us something about it.
May I go first?
Yes, of course.
Digitization. In Kenya, the pandemic, and especially in the health sector, meant we had to work digitally, and that put distance between regulators and businesses, and it really enhanced e-government. And we've been trying to pursue e-government as a way of putting distance between those who are potentially seeking economic rent. So it's really made a difference, because many things we no longer have to contact people directly in government to get things done.
Thank you.
It's all online.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else on this one?
Can you jump in? Yes,
course.
thank you. Well, actually, that was one of the companies that we profiled in our publication earlier this year. It's called Doing Business with Integrity, where we just asked SME owners in various countries how they survived and how business integrity helped or did not help. And so we got a response from one company that is profiled in this publication from Albania. And due to, informality is a big issue in Albania, like in many other markets, to be honest. So, but what they did, this small company, medium-sized company, they made sure that they operate formally. They really put everything in order. And when COVID hit, they were able to maintain their employees, because employees really wanted to stay with the company because of the ethical value, the culture of integrity that the company managed to build. And the company managed to survive without losing any employees and with full pay, maintaining full pay. So this is as a result, they themselves, the owners of the company, recognized that because of their business integrity efforts, they managed to actually overcome the heavy consequences of COVID.
Yeah, well, in extreme circumstances, we learn who is really capable of doing it. but also what can be the consequences if we don't do it. Trisha, Rebecca, any ideas? Trisha?
I just wanted to add to that, we saw the exact same outcomes in the APAC region. The Business Ethics for APAC SMEs initiative undertook a survey of small businesses across the region to ask how they fared through COVID. And we found, we found that companies that had a medium to high maturity compliance program continue to grow, continue to expand into foreign markets, and continue to add employees. They had a framework in place to address the unforeseen compliance and ethics risks that the pandemic created, and they were more resilient because of it. And it really widened the gap with companies that had not undertaken any sort of ethics or compliance programming. They did not fare as well. And so I'm happy to share this report and put a link into the chat. I think it's really important that we have data to show companies that had compliance programs did better.
Thank you. So we have 2 questions in the chat which are not answered yet. Let's start with the first one, because I see for the second one, Anais is typing the answer from Anais from the OECD. So the question which remains open is the following one by Ashok Sarakampani. Where does schools and universities fit into this anti-corruption drive? They form a very important supply chain as students of today become next generation employees in SMEs. Anti-corruption should become part of curriculum. What can be done here and by whom? Well, this is something which is really important, education starting very early. So, any volunteers again?
I'm happy to volunteer on this one. It's something I really burn for. Yeah, I think it's a must. The education needs, the curriculum of the education system needs to include that corruption is wrong. We need to start from an early age. We need to put it into, not in the senior school or in graduate school, we need to put it into primary school. That you need to learn that having good ethics and having good ethics is very important. So this can be done in different ways. If you look at Thailand, you cannot teach good ethics and teach that corruption is wrong the same way. You have to also look at the level of education that they have and which background they come from. So, in Thailand, you have those that are very fortunate with who are able to go to private schools, and you also have those that don't have those advantages. We're building the future workforce. So I think it's very, very important that we find different ways to educate. One size doesn't fit all, but we need to start early. And I think by doing that, I think we can build a strong and ethical, strong future workforce.
Well, what you said, let's say, many useful things, but what you said now at the end, I think it's the key point here. We have to start early. And we really have to do it, because it is so much easier to influence young kids than, let's say, the formed adults already, who have the values and principles, and then it's really hard to influence them later on. This is the only question still open. Well, we gave an answer already. Would Ekaterina, Trisha, or Gakombe want to do something here? Add something here on education?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to mention that there was just an international anti-corruption conference that took place in Washington, D.C. this past week. And that topic of education was also mentioned a number of times in various sessions. And I think one participant proposed that it will be a curriculum for the daycares, and the story tales will be around corruption. And he proposed even certain scenarios of how to educate kids at 3- and 4-year-olds so they understand what corruption is and how harmful it is for society, not to erode the integrity of humans as they grow and become really honest, transparent people who are guided by these values. So just wanted to see that this has been really discussed in all forums anti-corruption related. And I think there is only, at least I'm aware of one program, maybe there are more, of specifically training anti-corruption compliance professionals at the universities, at the law schools at universities. I think there is one in the US. And so there are more initiatives like that up here. There is a recognition that the compliance professionals should be trained specifically on anti-corruption.
Thank you. Trisha.
I'll add on as well. I mean, that's a really great point, and something that we are working towards in the APAC initiative. I think this is a positive of collective action approaches, because any relevant stakeholder can be engaged through a collective action mechanism. And that includes students, that includes people responsible for curriculum development. So I think collective action is really well positioned to start to bring in the stakeholder group. So I think that's just another plus for why government should be convening and supporting collective action approaches, because it allows for really diverse groups to bring in different perspectives, but then to actually also benefit from that work. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, we don't have any open questions in the chat. Nobody else is asking for the floor. So I will have a question for Rebecca, which it's on a bit lighter note. I would not ask it if it would not be the end of the, let's say, the webinar. What is this in your background?
Oh, that's a pendant that I design.
Very nice. I have to say, very nice.
So, when you're in the industry, you have to promote what you're doing.
Yeah, okay. So what we learned today is, in addition to the fact that there are two very important publications out today from the OECD, the first one on how to assist the SMEs in fighting corruption risk, and the second one on how to fight, let's say, for compliance in times of crisis. We also learned that SMEs are exposed to no lesser corruption than the big companies. The only problem is that they are not so much aware of it, and they usually lack the needed knowledge how to fight it. And that's why they need some assistance. And the assistance, of course, it has to be first initiated by the governments, but then it's a whole array of institutions and organizations which can offer assistance to SMEs. And reading those two publications and listening to the webinar today, or maybe taking a look at the recording, which will be published to the OECD website, the SMEs or their representatives might get many ideas where to look for help and where to look for assistance. But as Kanyanya said, you see, if we leave the minefield as it is, which means we will not eliminate the risks which are awaiting for the SMEs, then we can be almost sure that even the most, let's say, honest or the SMEs with high levels of integrity will one day step on the mine. So we'll have to do both. We'll have to deal with the conditions and circumstances which are creating corruption risks, but we'll also have to deal with the efforts of SMEs to identify, prevent, and mitigate those corruption risks. Rebecca, Trisha, Kanyanya, Ekaterina, thank you so much for your participation today. We all learned a lot from you, and you see, you have been asked already to post different, let's say, links. And I'm afraid that you will suffer even more, because I'm sure people will reach out to you to use more of your experience. So thank you, first of all, to you for the speakers, then Antonio Gomes, and of course to all participants who are with us today. And since we are approaching the end of the year, to those of you who are celebrating Christmas, Merry Christmas, and a very Happy New Year. Let us stay safe and see each other soon in next occasion, discussing how to fight corruption, and not only discuss how to fight it, but also do it. Thank you and goodbye.